Today we're going to discuss the coherence principle, one of the most important principles you should use to avoid overloading your information gathering channels. When you put together a presentation for training, how much information do you put on a slide? Is it cluttered? Do you have a lot of extraneous stuff including it in your slide? This could be text, audio, graphics. When you think of your topic, it should be represented by something that stands alone, that does in fact represent your topic. So when I think of the coherence principle, I immediately think of my information not being cluttered. It should be uncluttered. So if I want you to remember the essence of the coherence principle, I would anchor this thought with a corresponding graphic, such as this. This slide shows a good balance of white space, a quality graphic that supports my message. If I need to add text to add emphasis to the slide, it should only be there as a supporting word or phrase, such as, in this case, good use of the coherence principle. The key is to use the appear animation to sequence your graphic and text to your audio text. According to the coherence principle, you should avoid adding any material that does not support the instructional goal. The coherence principle is important because it is commonly violated. You might have heard or seen the presentation Death by PowerPoint. The coherence principle is straightforward to apply and has a strong impact on learning. Let's look at a situation that violates the coherence principle. The graph is too small to be understood, way too much text, too small of text at the bottom. Your eye has no place to focus its attention. Yet this is what we deal with all of the time in training. Too much information. So another analogy is to think of TMI, too much information, when you think of the coherence principle. There are three principles that make up the coherence principle that deal with audio, graphics, and text. You remember cognitive overload? This is the basis for the coherence principle. So with cognitive overload, this is where we do not use our visual and audio channels effectively. Let's look at the first part of the coherence principle. Extraneous audio. So we misuse this quite often. So in thinking about audio and how it is misused, we think of audio. So let's first talk about audio or extraneous audio and how it is misused. While background music might enhance slideshow pictures, in fact it adds to the effect of the pictures, but it should not be used in online instructing. It is another example of clutter. You have heard the phrase, if it's not part of the solution, it's part of the problem. Well, that's what the coherence principle is all about. Not only should your music be avoided, but also the extraneous sounds that you might put in for effect, such as honks and horns, bells and whistles, that do not add any value to the instruction. They are part of the clutter. So let's talk about extraneous graphics. Pictures, including color photos and action video clips, can make a multimedia experience more interesting. While this picture is interesting, it does not add to the topic. In fact, it is the opposite of the topic. The problem is that interest cannot be added to an otherwise boring lesson like some kind of seasoning. Dewey in 1913 coined this phrase, but it is appropriate today as it was then. Let me repeat that. The problem is that interest cannot be added to an otherwise boring lesson like some kind of seasoning. And that's what we try to do when we try to dress up our presentations. The content is the main thing. According to the cognitive theory of multimedia learning, the learner is actively seeking to make sense of the presented material. If the learner is successful in building a coherent mental representation of the presented material, the learner experiences something called that could be in tune to enjoyment. So extraneous pictures cause, what is it? Clutter. Therefore, adding extraneous pictures can interfere with the process of sense-making because learners have a limited cognitive capacity for processing incoming material. That's right out of week 2. And the third principle of the coherence principle is using extraneous words. If you have ever taken classes with me, you know my mantra is clarity and brevity. This is true when you think of how much you want to convey in your instruction also. It should not be a recreation of a book. Short phrases and quality graphics add to the instruction, but you should also keep your voiceover to a minimum. Do not read the book to explain your topic. Your phrases should be clear and to the point and highlight the important points of the topic. You can always refer the student to certain readings from a book or supply them with a PDF copy of the full text. What you should be doing in online learning is to promote learning. So you should avoid extraneous words as text and audio to avoid clutter. So let's review. Take a minute or so and we'll take a look at the words and associate them to their associated graphic. I will now move the text element to its graphic. Let's see if you came up with the same thing. Extraneous words. Does that picture anchor your thought process for extraneous words? Clutter. Extraneous graphics. Uncluttered, or the essence of the coherence principle. Too much information, all the graph and the text, and you'll probably even do in a voiceover that's even not associated with it. So that's way too much information. And finally, extraneous audio. Is this what you come up with? Each one of the elements should be an anchor that helps create the mental model for your new learning. By understanding all of these, you can avoid extraneous information, which we now know as what? Clutter. Uncluttering is the essence of coherence. Clutter is violating the coherence principle. By the way, I use the motion path feature to move the text box to its graphic. You might take a look at that and maybe include that when it's appropriate in a future lesson. Well, that's all I have for now. This is the reference page where I use the graphics. Thanks, and talk with you later.